Usually we think of history like walking through a museum.
Right,
You start in one wing, maybe the ancient world, right?
right.
You look at the dusty artifacts in their glass cases, and then you just walk through a doorway into the next room.
Leaving the previous era completely behind.
Exactly. It feels like a straight line, just a
It,
sequence of dead guys and old books that have absolutely nothing to do with, you making your morning coffee today.
right, it feels totally disconnected from our actual lives.
But what if I told you that the blood-soaked plains of Homer's Iliad, the rigid, terrifying laws of medieval Europe, and the existential dread of modern art aren't just historical eras?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. What if they are a live map of your own brain right now?
I mean, that completely shifts how you view both the past and yourself.
It really does.
Because we're looking at a framework today that suggests the succession of massive empires or, the violent shifts in religious doctrine and the great philosophical leaps of the last 3,000 years. They aren't just a record of things that happened.
Right.
They are actually an external mirror reflecting the internal evolution of human consciousness.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today's deep dive is based on a truly fascinating essay from the Tao of Fred titled The Spiral of the West, From Myth to Mystery.
That's a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is. And the core of this essay relies on a psychological framework called spiral dynamics. To really grasp this, we had to kind of throw away that museum hallway idea.
Yeah, the straight line doesn't work here.
No. Think of human consciousness not as a ladder where you climb up and leave the bottom rungs behind, but more like the rings of a tree.
I love that analogy.
Right. As a tree grows, it expands outward, creating a new, wider ring to interact with the environment. But the core, those tight early rings,
They're still there.
exactly, they remain right there inside the center of the tree. They are the dense, solid foundation that allows the entire structure to stand tall in a storm. You grow outward, but your history remains alive inside you.
And taking that tree ring analogy further, spiral dynamics, which was first articulated by the psychologist Claire W. Graves.
Oh, right, Graves.
Yeah, and later expanded by thinkers like Don Beck and Christopher Cowan. It basically operates on one foundational rule. It is the concept of transcend and include.
Transcend and include, meaning you don't just, obliterate the past when you evolve.
Precisely. The mechanism of evolution here isn't random. A new stage of consciousness only emerges because the previous stage created catastrophic problems it simply couldn't solve.
It hits a wall.
It hits a massive wall with its existing worldview. The pressure builds until the system cracks. So the new stage emerges to transcend the limitations of the old one.
To solve the crisis.
Right, it solves the crisis. But to survive, it must include the fundamental capacities of the previous stage.
Like the tree rings. If a tree grows a new ring, but the inner rings rot away,
The tree hollows out and collapses. Exactly. If a new stage of human awareness doesn't include the lessons of the past, the society or the individual psyche becomes dangerously unstable.
so we are mapping out this tree today. Let's travel to the very center.
The absolute beginning.
Yeah, the tightest, oldest ring of the spiral, where human consciousness first really begins to assert itself in the Western world. The essay calls this the mythic heroic consciousness.
Also known as the red stage. The age of power and fate.
Red stage.
Well,
Okay, so paint a picture of this for us.
we have to imagine a world before science, before written moral codes, before the idea of universal human rights even existed.
Okay, totally different paradigm.
Completely. This is where the Western worldview emerges from the mists, rooted deeply in myth and the epic imagination. And the prime text to understand this mechanism is Homer's Iliad.
Oh man, the Iliad is brutal.
It is incredibly brutal. When you step into the world of the Iliad, you are stepping into a reality that is not governed by moral law.
Not at all.
It is not governed by rational order. It is governed purely by raw power, by personal honor, and by the inscrutable, unavoidable will of the gods.
And we really need to specify what kind of gods we are talking about here.
Yes, that's crucial.
Because modern listeners might project a contemporary idea of a perfectly good, loving deity onto the ancient world.
Which they definitely were not.
No. The Greek gods of this red stage are basically just human beings with superpowers.
Yeah, they are incredibly jealous.
They are wrathful. They hold petty grudges for decades. I mean, they are driven entirely by desire and ego. They are magnified reflections of human passion.
That is exactly the psychological mechanism at play. What's fascinating here is that the gods are projections of the human state at that time.
Ah, I see.
And even those incredibly powerful, passionate gods must eventually bow to a darker, older force called fate.
Right, fate is always hovering about them.
Yeah, fate is this impersonal looming mechanism that sits above everything, dictating who lives and who dies, regardless of justice.
It doesn't care if you're good or bad.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Psychologically speaking, the red stage is the violent emergence of the raw ego.
A raw ego.
It is the moment when the individual first stands up out of the collective tribe and says, I am here and I matter.
So before this, there wasn't really an I.
Exactly. Before the red stage, consciousness was entirely tribal, merged with the group and the immediate physical environment.
So the red stage is assertive. It's impulsive. And it's absolutely hungry for recognition.
Yes. It seeks to carve out an identity through sheer strength.
But I look at this red stage, this raw, impulsive, power-hungry ego, and I wonder, isn't this just the terrible twos of human civilization?
Not a funny way to put it, but yeah.
I mean, it feels like humanity acting like a toddler throwing a tantrum because they didn't get their way.
Oh.
Achilles literally sits in his tent pouting while his friends die because his honor was insulted.
It is easy to judge it from where we sit now, for sure. But we have to understand why this stage is a massive developmental leap.
Okay, why is it a leap?
Because, like we said, it's the violent birth of the individual. Think of a hyper-competitive athlete or a warlord carving out a territory. There is a deeply vital, courageous energy there. You need that aggressive energy to survive in a hostile world and to separate yourself from the herd. It's about marking your territory.
I see. So it's not just a tantrum. It's the necessary force required to establish an independent self.
Exactly.
But the spiritual reality of this stage sounds terrifying.
Oh, it is entirely transactional and based on fear. At the red stage, the sacred is encountered merely as raw power.
It isn't something you love.
No, it isn't a presence you have a gentle, personal relationship with. It is a terrifying force to be appeased, or, if you are cunning enough, to be harnessed.
Like trying to control a storm.
Yes. When an ancient sailor sacrifices a bull to Poseidon before a sea voyage, they aren't doing it because Poseidon is a good or just god.
Right. They're doing it because Poseidon is incredibly powerful, extremely temperamental, and might drown them if they don't pay the toll.
Exactly. It's a shakedown.
So you have a society and an individual psyche operating purely on power, honor, and fear. But here is the problem with pure volatility, right? It eventually exhausts itself.
It always does.
You cannot exist in a state of constant, chaotic power struggles forever.
Yeah.
The warlord eventually wants to sleep without fear of being assassinated in his bed.
Right. The terrible twos have to end.
Because the child realizes they need some kind of predictable structure to actually grow. So out of the chaos and blood of the mythic ego, a desperate, overwhelming longing for order emerges.
And this is where the mechanism of evolution kicks in again. The problems created by red, the endless tribal warfare, the unpredictability of capricious gods, the sheer exhaustion of living by the sword, they demand a solution.
A solution that raw powers simply cannot provide.
Exactly. You cannot stab chaos to death.
Wow, yeah. You cannot stab chaos to death.
You have to organize it. And that desperate need for organization gives birth to the next ring on the tree.
Which moves us into the era of cosmic order. The blue stage. The age of law and meaning.
And this isn't just a minor shift.
No, this is humanity completely rewriting its relationship with reality, isn't it?
It is a monumental reorientation. Historically, this shift is marked by several world-changing movements happening in the West.
Like what?
Well, we see the Hebrew prophets bringing forth the radical idea of a singular moral God who cares about justice, not just sacrifices.
That's a huge shift from Poseidon.
Massive. We also see the ethical vision of early Christianity taking root, prioritizing the meek over the warlords.
Completely flipping the red stage values upside down.
Exactly. And in the realm of philosophy, we see the massive structured systems of Plato and Aristotle.
So they are essentially looking at the chaotic universe of Homer and saying, no, there is a blueprint here.
Yes. The fundamental assertion of the blue stage is that the universe is no longer arbitrary.
It isn't just the playground of jealous gods rolling dice with human lives.
Right. The universe is intentionally structured, it is entirely intelligible, and above all, it is morally charged.
So there's a right and a wrong built into the fabric of the universe.
Yes. The physical world and the spiritual world are deeply connected in a hierarchy. And this entire era reaches its absolute architectural peak in the medieval period with thinkers like Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, we need to pause on Aquinas. How did he actually pull that off?
Yeah.
Because mixing ancient Greek philosophy with medieval Christian theology sounds like mixing oil and water.
It does, but Aquinas' genius was in creating what we call the medieval synthesis. He took the rigorous, categorizing logic of Aristotle and married it to Christian divine revelation.
And what was the result of that marriage?
The result was the great chain of being. Imagine a massive cosmic ladder.
Okay, a ladder.
At the very top is God, pure perfection. Below God are the angels, categorized into specific choirs.
Right.
Below them, human beings. Below humans, animals, then plants, then minerals.
So everything has a rung.
Every single thing in the universe has an exact ordained place. A peasant knows exactly who they are and what their duty is. A king knows his place.
The cosmos is perfectly ordered.
And meaning is found by conforming to your assigned place in that order.
So what does this all mean for the human mind? If red was the birth of the raw ego, what is the psychological mechanism of blue?
Psychologically, this is the birth of conscience.
Conscience.
Yes, this is a massive evolutionary step. Think about it. In the red stage, you only avoid stealing because a stronger guy with a sword is watching you.
Right. The moment he turns his back, you take what you want.
But in the blue stage, the individual internalizes authority. You submit to a higher, invisible order, the law, the tradition, the moral commandments of God.
So you police yourself.
Exactly. You don't steal because it violates the cosmic order, and you will feel an internal mechanism guilt punishing you, even if no one sees you do it.
Wow. By submitting to this higher order, the individual trades the absolute freedom of the red stage for profound stability and meaning.
Yes, the trade-off is worth it for the security.
I think about this like that moment in life when you realize you cannot just act on every impulse. If you want to be part of a functioning family or a school or a society, you have to follow the rules of the house.
That's a perfect everyday example.
You have to sacrifice some of your raw ego to participate in a meaningful community.
And spiritually, the sacred is completely transformed here, too. God is no longer just the most powerful being. God is the source of justice and truth.
Right.
Truth becomes a sacred, fragile treasure that must be preserved, guarded, and lived out through strict obedience.
It provides immense psychological safety. You know exactly what happens after you die. You know exactly how to behave, and you know exactly who the authorities are. Yeah, there's always a but. Any system built entirely on preserving the rules is going to run into reality eventually, right?
This is where we see the mechanism of the shadow. In spiral dynamics, every stage solves the problems of the previous stage, but creates its own unique pathology.
So what's the shadow of blue?
The shadow of blue is absolute rigidity. The very system that provides such profound meaning and safety eventually begins to view any anomaly, any new information, as a lethal threat.
Because if the ultimate truth is already perfectly known and guarded by the authorities, the church, the state, the tradition, then asking questions isn't just curious.
It is heretical. It threatens to pull the pin on the grenade of meaning.
Ah, I see.
This is how you get mechanisms like the Inquisition. It wasn't just cartoon villainy. It was a desperate, terrifying attempt to protect the cosmic order from unraveling.
But imagine living in that rigid blue system. The church has all the answers, the king has all the authority, and the great chain of being is unquestionable.
It's airtight.
Right, until it isn't. Somebody invents the printing press, and suddenly people are reading texts for themselves.
Exactly.
Or worse, a scientist looks through a telescope and realizes that the Earth is actually orbiting the sun.
The Galileo moment.
Yeah, the Earth isn't the center of the cosmic ladder. The whole rigid structure cracks, and through that, crack steps our next stage.
The tension becomes unbearable. The blue system cannot process the new scientific data or the bloody religious wars tearing Europe apart. So the structure collapses, and we enter the rational individual consciousness,
The orange stage.
the age of the thinking self.
And we call this historical mechanism the Enlightenment.
Exactly. In the blue stage, your certainty came from the outside. It came from the cosmos, from divine revelation, from the external hierarchy telling you what was true.
But in the orange stage, authority undergoes a massive relocation.
It does. And the perfect avatar for this shift is the philosopher René Descartes.
Descartes is fascinating because he literally sits alone in a room and deconstructs reality. We have to explain his method because it perfectly captures how the orange mind works.
Descartes was living in a time when the old medieval truths were crumbling, and he wanted to find anything that was absolutely undeniably true.
So what does he do?
He sat alone in a stove-heated room.
Wait, really? A stove-heated room?
Yeah, literally a small heated room in Germany. And he employed a method of radical doubt. He decided to throw out anything that could possibly be doubted.
Okay, so he looks at the external world.
And he thinks, my senses trick me sometimes. I see optical illusions. Maybe this is all an illusion. He threw it out.
Wow. He looks at his own body.
He thinks, I could be dreaming right now. He threw it out. He even hypothesized that an evil demon might be deceiving him about basic things like mathematics.
That is wild. He strips away the church, the Bible, his senses, his physical form. What is left?
The mechanism of doubting itself, he realizes that even if he is being deceived about absolutely everything, there must be an I that is experiencing the deception.
He must exist in order to doubt.
Yes. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
He moves the anchor of reality from the heavens right into the individual human mind. That is a breathtaking shift.
It changes the course of human history.
Hmm.
Following him, thinkers like John Locke argue that the human mind is a blank slate, and we build knowledge through observation and reason, not divine impartation.
And then Immanuel Kant comes along.
Right. Kant regrounds ethics not in the Ten Commandments, but in human rationality and autonomy.
Suddenly, institutions lose their absolute monopoly on truth. You don't need a priest to tell you how the world works. You can look through a microscope and figure it out yourself.
Exactly. Religion shifts dramatically, too. It moves toward deism.
Deism, meaning.
The idea of a clockmaker god who built the universe, wound it up, and then stepped back to let it run on mechanical laws. Or it moves toward outright skepticism.
Psychologically, this marks the emergence of the truly autonomous self.
Yes. The blue self was a subject, obeying the order. The orange self is an active, analytical agent.
It is intensely goal-oriented and future-focused.
The individual realizes they are fully capable of manipulating and shaping the physical world through knowledge, the scientific method, and sheer effort.
This is the birth of the Industrial Revolution. Modern medicine, capitalism, and representative democracy.
The world we live in today.
Right. But wait, I have to push back here.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm looking at this list of achievements. The scientific method, the eradication of diseases, the concept of universal human rights, which ends the divine right of kings. We have literal rovers on Mars because of the orange stage.
It's incredibly impressive.
This feels like the finish line. If reason and individual liberty have solved the oppressive dogmas of the past, why isn't this the final stage of human evolution? Why isn't orange the end of history?
It is a very natural reaction to feel that way. Western society today is still deeply anchored in the orange stage, and we owe our physical survival and comfort to it.
Yeah, I like having antibiotics and the internet.
The achievements are undeniable, but we have to look at the psychological and spiritual cost of this massive liberation.
There's a cost.
A huge one. The sociologist Max Weber gave us the perfect term for the shadow mechanism of orange: disenchantment.
Disenchantment. Unpack that mechanism. How does reason disenchant the world?
Orange liberates humanity by explaining how the world works. But in doing so, it reduces the cosmos to a cold, dead, mechanical machine.
Oh, I see.
The majestic, morally charged universe of the blue stage is replaced by atoms bumping into each other in a void.
Meaning is gone.
Exactly.
Right.
A forest is no longer a sacred, living ecosystem. It is quantifiable lumber. A human being is no longer a soul connected to the divine. They are a biological machine to be optimized, or a consumer in a marketplace.
And spiritually.
The sacred is completely abstracted. It becomes an untestable hypothesis that science doesn't need, so it evaporates.
So the mechanism of orange solves our physical problems, but it starves our soul.
Beautifully put.
We gained control of the world, but we lost our sense of belonging to it. We have our smartphones, our democracies, and our extended lifespans, but we're looking up at the stars and feeling completely alone.
Yes.
Reason fixed the rigidity of dogma, but it created a terrifying vacuum of meaning.
Precisely. Reason and material success alone cannot fulfill the totality of the human spirit. And so, feeling this profound existential emptiness, the thinking self turns its critical, analytical eye away from the external mechanics of the world.
And it turns it violently inward.
Which initiates the next great disruption: the shift to pluralistic existential consciousness.
The green stage. The age of the inner world.
The triumph of objective reason creates its own worst critic. The orange stage promised that if we just gathered enough data, built enough machines, and optimized our societies, we would achieve utopia.
But it didn't happen.
No. The Industrial Revolution also brought massive alienation, brutal factory conditions, and eventually the mechanized slaughter of the world wars.
Right. The illusion of continuous rational progress shatters.
And the philosophers of this era are the ones ringing the alarm bells. You have thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche exposing the severe limitations of rationalism.
What were they saying specifically?
They point out that all this objective science and logic is entirely unable to tell you why you should get out of bed in the morning.
Science can tell you how the body works, but not why it matters.
Exactly. It neglects the lived, subjective, beating heart experience of being alive. We have to look closely at Nietzsche here because he perfectly articulates the crisis transitioning from orange to green.
Okay, let's look at Nietzsche.
When Nietzsche famously declared God is dead, he wasn't doing a victory dance for atheism.
Like he wasn't.
No, he was delivering a terrifying warning. He meant that the blue stage structure of absolute meaning and the orange stage structure of absolute rational truth had both collapsed under their own weight.
Wow.
We had killed the overarching narrative that gave our lives a foundation. And without that foundation, the individual is left completely untethered, floating in a terrifying void where they must invent their own meaning.
And you see this crisis explode in literature and art, too.
Absolutely.
The essay points to writers like James Joyce and Thomas Mann. They stop writing sweeping, objective epics about heroes conquering nations.
They turn completely inward.
Instead, they write deeply internal, fragmented narratives exploring the messy, subjective inner identity. They're exploring moral ambiguity and the desperate, confusing search for authenticity in a world that feels fake.
In the realm of religion and social structures, the green stage manifests as a profound shift toward the marginalized.
It drives liberal theology, interfaith dialogue, and massive movements centered around compassion, equality, and dismantling oppressive hierarchies.
The focus shifts entirely away from the objective truth of orange, or the rigid law of blue, and centers intensely on the well-being of the individual and the honoring of diverse lived experiences.
Here's where it gets really interesting, psychologically speaking. The core mechanism of the green individual is profound radical empathy.
Empathy is a defining characteristic of green.
They become highly sensitive to the context of other people's lives. They realize that what Orange claimed was universal objective truth was often just the highly subjective perspective of whoever held the most power.
Usually wealthy Western men.
Exactly. And so the concept of absolute certainty completely dissolves.
That dissolving of certainty is the hallmark of green. Spiritually, the sacred actually reappears here, but in a totally new form.
It doesn't return as the angry god of red.
No. Or the strict judge of blue, or the abstract clockmaker of orange. The sacred is experienced subjectively, as presence, as deep emotional relationship, as fierce care for the earth and for the marginalized.
I think about this transition like a massive quarter-life crisis.
That's a great comparison.
You grow up with these strict structures. This is how you succeed. This is what is right and wrong.
Yeah.
And then you go to college, or you travel, or you meet people from entirely different backgrounds, and you realize, wait, everyone's perspective has some validity based on their lived experience.
You start dismantling the mental structures you grew up with.
It is incredibly liberating to realize you don't have to force everyone into your box. But wait, I'm struggling with this.
What's the sticking point?
If green is all about empathy and realizing every perspective is valid, doesn't that just lead to total paralysis? I mean, how can society or an individual actually function if we can't agree on basic, grounding truths?
This raises an important question, and you have just hit upon the shadow of the green stage.
The shadow again.
And it is a severe shadow. If every single perspective is entirely valid based on lived experience, and if all hierarchies are just power constructs designed to oppress people, then how do we make decisions?
We can't?
How do we say one behavior is better than another? The shadow of green is extreme, debilitating relativism.
Because if you assert that this way is better than that way, the green mind accuses you of reverting to the rigid, oppressive blue stage, or the cold, colonial orange stage.
Exactly. It creates an endless cycle of deconstruction. The green stage is brilliant at taking apart toxic systems, but it is fundamentally incapable of building new ones.
Because building requires asserting a hierarchy of values.
Exactly. The psyche becomes completely exhausted by the constant deconstruction, the infighting over subjective truths, and the lack of forward direction.
So consciousness is backed into a corner again.
It desperately seeks a way to organize all this immense, beautiful complexity without sliding backward into the rigid, exclusionary rules of the past.
And that desperate need to organize the chaos without crushing the empathy births what might be the most fascinating leap of all.
Yeah.
Integral consciousness.
The yellow stage. the age of integration.
This is a monumental shift.
It really is. In the framework of spiral dynamics, everything from red to green is considered first-tier thinking.
First year.
And first-tier stages all share one fatal flaw. They believe their worldview is the only correct worldview, and everyone else is either primitive, evil, or stupid.
Right. Orange thinks blue is stupid. Green thinks orange is evil.
Exactly. But yellow is the jump to second-tier thinking. The defining characteristic of integral consciousness is that it is the very first stage that does not reject the previous stages.
That is the crucial mechanism. It
Exactly.
stops fighting the past.
Thinkers like the psychologist Carl Jung, who mapped the collective unconscious, or the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, or the contemporary philosopher Ken Wilber, what they're attempting to do is breathtaking.
What are they building?
They are building frameworks that integrate science, psychology, Eastern philosophy, and Western spirituality into coherent, functioning wholes.
They're tying it all together.
Yellow looks at the entire spiral and understands that red, blue, orange, and green are not mistakes. They are absolutely necessary developmental moments in the unfolding of consciousness.
Let me try to visualize this because the zooming out idea we usually use doesn't quite capture the active nature of it.
Okay, what's your visualization?
Think of human consciousness like a massive symphony orchestra.
Oh, I like this.
When you're in the lower stages, you are sitting in one section obsessed with your own instrument. Red is the pounding, aggressive rhythm of the timpani drum.
Yes.
Blue is the strict, unwavering metronome keeping the tempo. Orange is the brilliant, technically perfect violin soloist. And green is the D-resonant emotion of the cellos.
That fits perfectly.
In the first tier, the violin thinks the drum is too primitive, and the cello thinks the metronome is too rigid. They're all fighting for dominance. But shifting to yellow is like suddenly becoming the conductor.
That is a brilliant way to frame the mechanism of integral thought.
The conductor doesn't want the violin to sound like the drum.
Yeah, that would ruin it.
The conductor understands that you actually need the warrior's aggressive courage of red. You need the lawgiver's strict discipline of blue. You need the skeptic's analytical brilliance of orange. And you need the empath's deep compassion of green.
None of these elements can be removed without ruining the music. Yellow integrates them.
So psychologically, yellow is the capacity to hold immense contradictory complexity without collapsing under the weight of it.
Exactly. A yellow thinker can look at a vicious political disagreement, and instead of just getting angry, they can identify the developmental stages of the people arguing.
They see the matrix.
They see systems, they spot patterns, and they understand deep interdependencies. Spiritually, truth is no longer seen as a fixed, rigid point like in blue, nor is it seen as entirely relative and subjective like in green.
What is truth to yellow then?
Truth is seen as an evolutionary unfolding process. Truth is a living organism that adapts and grows.
It sounds incredibly advanced. It is the beginning of true synthesis and wisdom.
It is.
But as I look at this beautiful, complex system where everything finally fits together, it leaves me asking, is this the end?
It feels like it should be.
Yeah. Once we map out the whole system, once we understand how science and religion and psychology all fit together perfectly, what is left to do? The brain has finally figured itself out.
That is the ultimate question of the integral stage. And to answer it, we have to look to the absolute edge of the map.
The edge of the map.
Because no matter how brilliant, how inclusive, or how integral your map of reality is, the map is never the actual territory.
The menu is not the meal.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final historical and psychological leap. Mystical apophatic consciousness. The turquoise stage. The age of mystery.
The spiral ultimately opens into that which simply cannot be contained within any system, no matter how complex or color-coded that system is.
It transcends systems entirely.
Yes. The essay points us toward the apophatic tradition of theology and philosophy.
Apophatic. We really need to unpack that mechanism.
But the apophatic tradition is often called the via negativa, or the way of unknowing.
Unknowing.
It is the attempt to approach the divine or the ultimate truth of reality by speaking only in terms of what it is not, rather than what it is.
Oh, because language is too limited?
Because any concept, any word, any philosophical system we use to define the ultimate reality is infinitely too small.
It's like trying to sculpt an elephant out of a block of marble. You don't build the elephant, you take your chisel and you chip away absolutely everything that is not the elephant until only the truth remains.
Exactly. Or imagine trying to explain the sheer vastness of the Pacific Ocean to someone who has only ever lived in a desert and only understands water as something contained in a tiny clay cup.
Right.
If you give them the ocean, the cup shatters. The apophatic thinkers, figures like the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart or the philosopher Nicholas of Cusa, they understood this perfectly.
What did they say about it?
Eckhart famously prayed, "God, rid me of God."
Wow.
He meant, rid me of my tiny, conceptual, human-made idea of God so that I can experience the actual, unnameable ground of reality.
So in turquoise, ultimate truth isn't a complex system you finally figure out. It isn't an equation.
No.
It isn't something that can be said or conceptualized at all.
At this stage, God, or the sacred, is no longer seen as an object out there in the universe, not even an integrated dynamic object.
What is it then?
The divine is encountered as the very ground of being itself, the silence out of which the music of the symphony plays.
That's beautiful.
And psychologically, this causes a profound radical shift. There is a deep loosening of identity. The individual no longer clings to their roles.
They let go.
They don't cling to their beliefs. They don't even cling to the need for everything to be intellectually coherent. The self becomes transparent.
To the orange stage, the thinking self, the idea of letting go of your identity and your need to have everything perfectly categorized and logical, sounds absolutely terrifying.
It sounds like psychological death to orange.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
But from the perspective of turquoise, it sounds like the ultimate peace.
Mm-hmm.
I want you, listening right now, to just imagine that feeling for a second.
Just sit with it.
Imagine letting go of the desperate, exhausting need to have a perfectly coherent identity or a perfectly mapped out worldview that you have to defend on the internet all the time. Imagine the relief of just stopping.
It is the ultimate relief. Spiritually, the sacred is experienced purely as unity, as infinite depth, and as silence.
Silences.
We have to emphasize the paradox of turquoise because this is where a lot of people misunderstand mysticism.
What's the paradox?
The turquoise stage doesn't reject the lower stages either. It doesn't mean you just sit on a mountaintop, meditate, and ignore the suffering of the world.
Right. You don't just float away into the ether and stop paying rent.
A person operating from this mystical consciousness can still do the highly organized work of paying taxes, which utilizes orange.
They can still obey traffic laws, which is blue.
They can still fight passionately for social justice and human rights, which is green.
So what changes?
The difference is entirely internal. They see all of these actions, all of these stages, as beautifully temporary expressions of the exact same ineffable source.
They chop wood and carry water.
Yes, but they are entirely unattached to the ego's frantic need to win the game.
They are playing the game, but they know it's a game. They are fully awake within the dream.
That's it, exactly.
Which brings us to the most practical, intimate part of this deep dive. We've spent this time talking about sweeping historical eras, about Descartes in his stove-heated room, about the mechanisms of philosophers and mystics.
The big abstract concepts.
But the true genius of this framework, from the Tao of Fred, is bringing these profound concepts back down to the human heart. To your daily life, listening to this right now, the spiral within.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the history of the West that we've just tracked, from the blood and thunder of Homer to the strict law of Aquinas, the mechanical reason of Descartes, the subjective empathy of the existentialists, the systems of Wilbur, and the silence of the mystics, is not just out there in the past.
Wow.
It is an active, internal biography of every single human being.
We contain all of these stages simultaneously. Inside you, right now, is the warrior of red, the lawgiver of blue, the skeptic of orange, the empath of green, the integrator of yellow, and the mystic of turquoise.
They are all there.
They're all living inside your psyche, taking turns at the steering wheel depending on what kind of day you're having.
The profound realization is that the goal of human life is not to win the spiral.
It's not a ladder to climb.
It isn't a race to rush to the top and become a turquoise mystic so you can look down on everyone else.
Right. If you are trying to beat everyone else to enlightenment, you're actually just using orange competitiveness and red ego to try and win a spiritual game.
You're completely missing the point.
The task of a healthy human life is to allow all of these internal voices, all of these historical epochs living inside you, to find their proper place within the larger whole of your psyche.
So well said.
So I want to ask you directly, which stage is driving your life right now? When you look at how you acted this past week, are you operating from a place of raw ego and survival, just trying to assert your power at work?
Are you desperately craving order and finding comfort in rigid rules?
Are you relentlessly deconstructing your beliefs and feeling the exhaustion of that green stage empathy? Or are you trying to conduct the symphony and integrate it all?
There is no wrong answer here.
None. The point is simply to notice the mechanism at play.
Notice where you are and honor the necessity of that stage. Because you cannot skip steps.
You can't just bypass the hard work.
You cannot integrate the entire system until you have fully experienced the deep empathy of green. And you can't experience that empathy until you have developed the capable, autonomous self of orange. Every single ring of the tree is holy.
Every stage is necessary to hold you up. We have traveled an immense distance today.
We really have.
We started in the chaotic, blood-soaked plains of Troy with Homer's heroes fighting against fate. We built the towering, rigid cathedrals of cosmic order.
We peered through the telescope of the Enlightenment's thinking self and disenchanted the world.
We navigated the beautiful, fragmented inner world of the existentialists. We stepped up to the conductor's podium to hear the integrated symphony of the whole system.
And finally, we stepped off the map entirely into the profound, echoing silence of the mystics.
We have discovered that the history of the world is really just the story of our own minds slowly coming awake.
And if there's one final, provocative thought to take away, drawn directly from the edge of this theory, it is this.
Let's hear it.
The spiral does not end. It simply opens.
It opens.
When you reach the absolute limits of what your mind can comprehend, what lies beyond is not just another intellectual system to learn. It is not a new concept to grasp.
What is it?
As the apophatic mystics knew, the final truth of the universe is not something we grasp. It is something that gently and silently grasps us.
Something that gently and silently grasps us. Think back to that tree ring analogy we talked about at the very beginning. You aren't just a visitor walking through the museum of your own mind.
No.
You are the living wood itself. But even more than that, you are the open sky above the branches, drawing the tree upward. I invite you to notice the spiral operating in your own life today.
Notice the warrior, notice the skeptic, notice the empath.
Honor wherever you are on the journey, knowing that every ring is holding you up. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Take care of yourselves.